Okay, so we're about to try the first example in the chapter, and as you look through the code, you're going to notice that we're going to have a server-side set of code and a client-side set of code, and those need to be run independently of each other. And one thing that you might need to do if you don't have software like this loaded on your machine is download it. This particular piece of software is available for free. It comes from the people that make the Apache web server. And if you just very simply Google XAMPP, I think that's how you say it, that's how I've always said it, you'll see that it's a pre-built configuration that runs all this software plus a little bit more. Notice, I think that's kind of interesting, is they recently replaced MySQL with the Maria database. Uses all the same syntax. And I've seen that product is gaining a little bit of popularity out there. MySQL is still king, but for whatever reason, they added that to this package. But if you go ahead and you download this for whatever platform that you're using and get it installed, you will then be able to launch this software. Now, notice that this has a lot of different server components that are pre-built in. One is the Apache web server. One is, well, it says MySQL. I'm surprised they didn't change it here. But okay, the database component. What do you suppose FileZilla does? Creates an FTP server. So you can set up your machine to have accounts and allow people to FTP to their own accounts using that mechanism. Mercury is a tool for sending email, so you can have your own email server running with this product. And Tomcat is designed for dishing out server-side Java pages. So that is going to be one of the tools that we're going to use to do this. Now, I have not explored Mercury, and it's one of those things where I probably should. And that's assuming I have a PHP info to draw from here. Nope. And I'm actually going to pause here for a second to see if I can find the file. After doing a little bit of checking, I didn't see that Tomcat was running on Mercury, and I don't have the admin rights to go turn it on. So we're going to work with this local server component. But just keep in mind that depending on the kind of machine that you're working with, that machine might not be a web server at all. It is not uncommon, though, for web servers to have Java server-side components running, though. Depends on your host. Apparently that's not a priority on Mercury. Now, Tomcat, like any of these other servers here, you can start and stop, and you can also configure them. And I'm actually going to just very quickly just jump into some of these files here. So let's take a look at the server XML file. All right. Take a look at some of the addresses that they have listed here. You guys see the server address there? Mm-hmm. That, I'm going to say that seems a little bit unusual to me, that they're using that particular one. Okay. Yeah, and actually, see this little bit of XML code right here? This will probably be the port that we're attaching to, port 8080. So the traffic is actually going to travel using the HTTP protocol, so it's going to go out over the network using that method to send the data, and it's going to connect to that port. So that's going to be our target port. Now, depending on the other stuff that we're doing, you can see that they have different ports available for those things. It's also kind of interesting to explore some of these other files as well. Notice that you can actually set up users to have different permissions. That's the one thing that you can do. If you're running it if you're running this to dish out web pages, which we can do. So some of the stuff that we did before where we were using Glassfish to pump out our web pages, you can actually use this to help put out things called servlets, which are not too far removed from what we did. And then you can control all the settings here for that. And then finally, the context. And what basically this does is it allows you to specify certain resources that are available for your application as you're working with it. So to tell it where the folders are and where to find things. That's kind of the long and short of that. All right, so if you want, you can go ahead and click the start button here and just to see if it actually launches for you. You give it a second, and if you get the little green light, basically you're good. And hopefully that's the case for all of you here in the classroom and at home. I'm going to pause for a moment just to check on everyone. Okay, so in the few moments that I paused here, we were doing a little bit of exploring. And the one thing I was pointing out to everybody is that in the root of your C drive is the default location for where XAMPP installs itself. If you go into that folder, you're going to see a number of other folders, one of them being Tomcat. And then when you go into that folder, you'll find a bunch of resources, a lot of different ones. Now, the one that we're particularly concerned with right now is the web apps folder and some of the things that are inside here. In the root folder is the spot where the default page will be loaded for Tomcat. So you can see here there's a number of different files. Notice there's no HTML files, but you will notice a lot of HTML-like files that are included. So for example, there's a CSS file and there's some images, etc. And these are things that are used to stitch together the page that Java will do by default. We were just taking a look at this particular file, which is, notice, an index.jsp file. And JSP stands for Java Server Pages. And this is not too dissimilar from working with the Java Server Faces things that we've already toyed with somewhat. And you'll see some similarities in syntax. If you're taking a look at the contents of the page, you can see it's pretty much a standard HTML page in a majority of its content, with the exception of a little bit of the other Java-related things that we're throwing in. And then you can see the tags that kind of relate. And these are very similar to ASP tags, or similar to some of the Java Server Faces stuff, with some slight twists, because really the majority of the document itself is standard HTML, and then we have little components like this that are populated automatically by virtue of variables or other programmatic actions. Now, if you are running your XAMPP software and you've turned on Tomcat, so Tomcat is running, you'll notice that it will list all the different port addresses, and the different addresses are used for different things, but the primary port is port 8080. So the traffic that's going to and from the server does operate on the web protocol of HTTP, so it travels through to that port. Now, one way we can test to make sure that it's all running correctly is very simply to go to your browser, type in localhost, and then a colon, and then 8080 to indicate the port address. And then if everything is good, which we hope it is, you'll get this page or something very similar to it depending on the version that you're running. And this basically tells you that it's up and running and everything's okay. All right, so let's actually, now that we have Tomcat up and running, let's jump over to our code. So bring up whatever environment you want to run, whether it's NetBeans or Eclipse. I'm going to switch back to Eclipse today.